Robert Caston stood in his backyard, staring at the freshly dug trench that cut like a scar across his property. The exposed PVC pipe, cleanly severed, gleamed white against the parched earth. Water, precious water in the midst of California's worst drought in 50 years, trickled from the cut end, forming a small, muddy puddle before disappearing into the thirsty ground. "They actually did it," he muttered, pushing back his sweat-stained hat to wipe his brow. The late August sun beat down mercilessly, the temperature already climbing past 90 degrees, though it wasn't yet 10 in the morning. "Those self-righteous bastards actually cut my water line." 3 days earlier, Robert had received the certified letter from the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. The crisp official letterhead and formal language did nothing to soften the message. His unauthorized irrigation system was in direct violation of HOA bylaws and community water restrictions. He had 72 hours to remove it, or the HOA would take necessary remedial action. Robert had installed the system 6 months ago, a simple gravity-fed line that diverted a small portion of Cottonwood Creek's flow through his property before returning it downstream. The creek ran along the back edge of his 5 acres, technically outside HOA jurisdiction, and the water didn't come from the community's ration supply. He researched state water rights laws thoroughly before installation. Everything was legal if not explicitly approved by the HOA. He pulled his phone from his pocket and took several photos of the damage, carefully documenting the clean cut of the pipe and the HOA's obvious trespassing onto his property. As he crouched for a close-up shot, he noticed the business card tucked under a small rock. "Precision Landscaping, proud partners of the Whispering Pines HOA." The card included a work order number and was signed by Diane Winters, HOA president. "Amateur hour," Robert said, pocketing the card, left evidence right at the scene. He stood and turned toward the back of his property, where the land sloped gently down to Cottonwood Creek. From here, he could see his neighbors' yards stretching in both directions, immaculate emerald lawns despite water restrictions, pristine swimming pools topped off weekly, ornamental fountains flowing day and night. Meanwhile, the county had mandated a 35% reduction in residential water usage, with steep penalties for exceeding quotas. The creek itself, the source of his modest irrigation, was noticeably diminished this summer. Where it had once flowed robust and clear, it now moved sluggishly between exposed rocks, its level down nearly 2 feet from the previous year. Still, it provided enough for Robert's needs. Not a lush lawn or swimming pool, but a small vegetable garden and a few fruit trees he planted when he first moved in 5 years ago. He walked back toward his modest ranch-style house, which stood in sharp contrast to the sprawling Mediterranean villas and colonial mansions that dominated Whispering Pines. Robert had bought the property before property values skyrocketed, before the development expanded to include 3 golf courses and an artificial lake, before the HOA grew from a friendly neighborhood committee to the quasi-governmental entity it had become. Inside, he grabbed his laptop and pulled up his email. The HOA Battles folder contained over 50 threads documenting his ongoing conflicts with the association. Citations for unapproved paint colors. Warnings about native plant landscaping deemed unsightly. Complaints about his vintage truck parked in his own driveway. But this, trespassing and property damage, this was different. Robert's fingers hovered over the keyboard as he considered his next move. Diane Winters and her HOA board had no idea who they were dealing with. Before retiring to Whispering Pines, Robert had spent 30 years as a hydrologist with the U.S. Geological Survey. He understood water, its movement, its preciousness, its power, better than anyone in the county. And he knew something about Cottonwood Creek at the HOA, and their air-conditioned meeting room with their Robert's rules of order and their petty bylaws did not. The creek was dying, and when it finally ran dry, the consequences would reach far beyond Robert's modest vegetable garden. He began to type. Robert hadn't always been at odds with the Whispering Pines HOA. When he first moved to the community, he even attended a few meetings, impressed by their apparent commitment to environmental stewardship outlined in their glossy brochures. But the reality had proven quite different. A week after discovering his severed water line, Robert sat in the back row of the community center during the monthly HOA meeting. He watched as Diane Winters, impeccably dressed in a cream-colored suit despite the persistent heat, directed the proceedings with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. And finally, I'm pleased to report that all unauthorized water usage has been addressed, Diane announced to murmurs of approval. Our community continues to maintain its aesthetic standards while responsibly managing resources during this difficult time. Robert nearly laughed out loud. The HOA's version of responsible management included exemptions for the 3 golf courses, which consumed more water daily than all residential properties combined. The artificial lake, half empty now but still maintained, lost thousands of gallons to evaporation every day. As the meeting adjourned, Robert approached the front table where Diane was gathering her papers. Several board members eyed him warily, his reputation as a troublemaker well established by now. "Mrs. Winters," he said pleasantly, "I believe we have something to discuss." Diane glanced up, her smile professional but cool. "Mr. Caston, if you have concerns, please submit them in writing through the proper channels." Robert placed a folder on the table. "I've already done that, multiple times. This is different." He opened the folder to reveal the photographs of his cut water line along with the business card from Precision Landscaping. "This is documentation of trespassing and property damage authorized by you personally." A flicker of unease crossed Diane's face before her composed expression returned. "Our bylaws clearly state, my water system draws from Cottonwood Creek, which is not under HOA jurisdiction." Robert interrupted. "I hold riparian water rights under California law. What your contractors did was illegal." Board member Frank Chen, a retired corporate attorney, leaned forward. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately, Diane." "There's nothing to discuss," Diane replied firmly. "The system violated our landscaping regulations and emergency water restrictions." Robert shook his head. "This isn't about my garden, Mrs. Winters. This is about something much bigger." He pulled out a second set of documents, charts, graphs, and satellite images. "I've been monitoring Cottonwood Creek for the past 3 years. It's not just low because of the drought. It's being affected by the golf courses and that artificial lake." He spread the papers across the table. "The creek feeds the aquifer that supplies well water to properties on the east side of the community. Properties like yours, Mrs. Winters." Several homeowners lingered nearby, listening with growing interest. "At current usage rates," Robert continued, "I project the creek will run completely dry within 2 months. When that happens, the wells will follow shortly after. And despite what your landscapers might think, you can't just turn water back on once an aquifer depletes." Frank Chen studied the charts with a frown. "These projections seem rather dramatic." "They're conservative, actually," Robert replied. "I shared my data with former colleagues at the USGS. They agree." Diane gathered the papers abruptly. "We have water management professionals on retainer, Mr. Caston. If there were any cause for concern, they would have addressed it." "You mean Westland Development Group?" Robert asked. "The same company that built your golf courses and artificial lake?" "I'm sure they have the community's best interests at heart." A woman in the back raised her hand. "My well pressure has been dropping for weeks. The water company said it was just because of high demand during summer." "My sprinkler system barely works anymore," another homeowner added. "Even on the 2 days we're allowed to use it." Diane tapped her gavel sharply. "This meeting is adjourned. The board will review Mr. Caston's concerns and respond appropriately." As people filed out, Robert noticed several homeowners eyeing the expansive lawns and water features with new suspicion, small cracks in the HOA's perfect facade. Later that evening, as twilight settled over Whispering Pines, Robert walked along Cottonwood Creek. The water level had dropped another inch since last week. Exposed roots of streamside trees reached desperately toward the receding moisture. The once vibrant corridor where willows and cottonwoods showed signs of stress. Yellowing leaves in August, branches bare where birds had nested in previous years. His phone buzzed with a text message from Elena Diaz, a county water resources manager, an old colleague from his USGS days. "Got your data. Running models now. Preliminary results confirm your timeline. 2 months, maybe less. County board needs concrete evidence before they'll act against Whispering Pines. Too many influential people. Need more data points." Robert texted back, "HOA cut my monitoring system. Working on alternatives." Elena's response came quickly. "Better work fast. Once creek hits critical level, aquifer damage becomes permanent." He pocketed his phone and looked up at the sprawling hillside homes of Whispering Pines. Sprinklers hissed into action across manicured lawns as the evening watering cycle began. Water restrictions clearly didn't apply equally to all residents. Back at his house, Robert entered his garage workshop. The space was neat and organized, workbenches lined with equipment from his professional days. He pulled out blueprints for a new monitoring system, one the HOA wouldn't easily find or disable. If they wouldn't listen to warnings, perhaps they would respond to evidence. As he worked late into the night, the distant sound of sprinklers continued, steadily draining the lifeblood of Cottonwood Creek in the relentless pursuit of the perfect lawn. September brought no relief to the parched landscape of Whispering Pines. The thermometers still climbed past 100 degrees most afternoons, and the promised autumn rains remained stubbornly absent. Robert's new monitoring system, a network of discrete sensors placed strategically along Cottonwood Creek, transmitted data hourly to his computer. The graphs told an increasingly alarming story. "It's accelerating," Elena said, studying the screen in Robert's home office. 3 weeks had passed since the HOA meeting. The creek's flow is down 60% from when you started measuring. At this rate, we won't make it to October. Robert nodded grimly. The irrigation schedule for the golf courses increased last week. They're trying to keep the fairways green for some tournament. The Whispering Pines Invitational, Alina confirmed. Major fundraiser for several county politicians. She sighed heavily. That's why I can't get any traction with the board. Too many connections. The doorbell rang, interrupting their discussion. Robert opened the door to find Frank Chen, the HOA board member and retired attorney, standing on his porch. Unlike Diane Winter's usual power suits, Frank was dressed casually in khakis and a golf shirt. "Mr. Caston," he said with a nod. "I apologize for the unannounced visit. May I come in?" Robert hesitated, then stepped aside. "Call me Robert." In the living room, Frank noticed Alina and the computer displaying the creek data. "Ms. Diaz," he said, recognizing the county water manager. "I didn't realize you were consulting privately." "This isn't official county business," Alina replied carefully. "Just old colleagues discussing hydrology." Frank studied the graphs on the screen. "Those projections can't be right. The creek has never run dry, not in the 20 years I've lived here. The creek has never had to support 3 golf courses, an artificial lake, and 400 homes during the worst drought in half a century," Robert pointed out. "What brings you here, Frank? Another HOA violation to deliver?" Frank had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Actually, I've been reviewing your documentation. The board may have overstepped regarding your water line." "May have?" Robert raised an eyebrow. "Diane insists we were within our rights, but I'm not convinced," Frank continued. "More importantly, I've noticed issues with my own well. The water pressure drops significantly in the evenings." "During peak irrigation hours," Elena noted. Frank nodded. "Several homeowners on the east side have reported similar problems. Our water management company assures us it's temporary, but after seeing your data at the meeting," he trailed off, looking troubled. "It's not temporary," Robert said bluntly. "Once the creek stops flowing, the damage to the aquifer could be permanent. Wells could take years to recover, if they ever do." "What about municipal water?" Frank asked. Elena shook her head. "The county system doesn't extend to Whispering Pines. Your community opted out during development to avoid water usage restrictions and higher rates. The developer promised the wells and creek would be sufficient." Frank looked genuinely alarmed now. "What can be done?" "Immediate reduction in non-essential water usage," Robert said. "Golf courses cut to minimum maintenance levels, drain the artificial lake. No landscape irrigation." "Diane will never agree to that," Frank said. "The property values will be zero if there's no water," Robert finished for him. The sound of a car door slamming interrupted their conversation. Through the window, they saw Diane Winters marching up the driveway, followed by 2 men in precision landscaping uniforms. "Speak of the devil," Robert muttered. The doorbell rang again, this time with an insistent, repeated pressing. Robert opened the door to find Diane, her face flushed with anger. "You've been trespassing on HOA property," she accused without preamble. "Installing unauthorized devices along the creek bed." "The creek isn't HOA property," Robert replied calmly, "and I'm monitoring water levels, not diverting water." "You're interfering with community water management," Diane insisted. "These gentlemen are here to remove any devices on community grounds." Alina stepped forward, her county ID badge prominently displayed. "Those sensors are now part of an official county water resource assessment, Mrs. Winters. Tampering with them would violate state environmental regulations." Diane faltered momentarily, then recovered. "Frank, what are you doing here?" Frank straightened his shoulders. "Investigating a legitimate concern about our water supply, something the entire board should be doing." "We have professionals handling our water resources," Diane said dismissively. "Yes, the same ones who built an artificial lake in the middle of a drought-prone region," Robert pointed out. "The same ones who designed a community that's draining its aquifer faster than it can replenish." "This is fear-mongering," Diane snapped, "and I won't have it undermining property values." As if on cue, Robert's phone chimed with an alert. He checked the screen and looked up grimly. "Monitoring Station 4 just went dry. The creek has stopped flowing at the eastern boundary." Alina immediately pulled out her tablet. "That's where the tributary from the hills connects. If that section is dry, the main creek will follow within days," Robert finished. Frank turned to Diane. "We need to call an emergency board meeting. Tonight." "Don't be ridiculous," Diane said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "It's just a temporary fluctuation." Robert's phone chimed again. Then again, more alerts from his monitoring system. "Station 3 is registering critical low levels," he reported. "Station 2 as well." He looked Diane directly in the eyes. "This isn't a fluctuation. This is exactly what I warned would happen." A precision landscaping truck drove slowly past the house, followed by another. Through the window, they could see more trucks moving through the neighborhood. "What's going on?" Frank asked. "Emergency landscape maintenance," Diane replied. "The golf tournament is next weekend. Everything needs to be perfect. Robert's expression hardened. You're accelerating the irrigation schedule? Now? Our contract with Westland Development requires. To hell with your contract, Robert interrupted. You're about to lose your water supply entirely, and you're worried about keeping the fairways green. Outside, sprinkler systems across the neighborhood hissed to life, even though it wasn't an approved watering day. The precision landscaping crews moved methodically from house to house, adjusting systems to maximum flow. Elena's tablet pinged with an urgent notification. The county monitoring station just registered a critical alert for the Whispering Pines aquifer. Robert, your models were conservative. At this rate of draw, we have days, not weeks. Diane's phone rang. She answered, listened briefly, then ended the call with a troubled expression. That was my housekeeper. She says there's no water coming from the taps. And so it begins, Robert said quietly. The emergency HOA meeting called that night had barely begun when the community center's water pressure dropped to a trickle, then stopped altogether. As board members argued over temporary solutions, their phones buzzed incessantly with calls and texts from panicked homeowners reporting dry taps and failing wells. By morning, bottled water sold out at every store within 20 miles. Tensions flared at the local supermarket as residents hoarded gallons of drinking water, the parking lot becoming a battlefield of luxury SUVs and desperate shoppers. The county emergency management office established a water distribution point at the high school, but lines stretched for blocks. Robert watched from his kitchen window as neighbors who had never acknowledged him before now trudged up his driveway carrying empty containers. His own well is situated on the western edge of the property and drawing from a deeper portion of the aquifer, still functioned barely. He prepared for this, installing a large storage tank in his garage months ago when his measurements first showed the creek's alarming decline. Fill what you need, he told each desperate visitor, directing them to the spigot he'd set up. But it won't last forever. By the second day, the scene of the golf courses transformed dramatically. The emerald fairways already showed patches of brown, the irrigation system silent. Westland Development Group executives arrived in a convoy of black SUVs, huddling with Diane and the remaining loyal board members in the clubhouse, which had been supplied with emergency water deliveries by private tanker trucks. Elena Diaz established a command center at Robert's house, coordinating with county officials and water resource specialists. Satellite images displayed on Robert's living room TV showed the stark reality. Cottonwood Creek had vanished, its once flowing path now a dusty scar across the landscape. The artificial lake is still being maintained, Elena noted with disgust, pointing to the images. They're using tanker trucks to keep it from dropping below a certain level. Priorities, Robert said bitterly. A knock at the door revealed Frank Chen and several other HOA board members, their faces grim. We've called for Diane's resignation, Frank announced without preamble. The board has voted to declare a state of emergency and request county assistance. That's a start, Elena replied, but the county can only do so much. The nearest municipal water line is 5 miles away. Running an emergency connection will take weeks, and it won't provide enough pressure for the entire community. Another board member, Maria Gonzalez, shook her head in dismay. How did we not see this coming? All those environmental impact reports the developer showed us were produced by the developer's own consultants, Robert finished for her. Classic conflict of interest. I tried to warn the board when I first moved here, but nobody wanted to hear that their paradise was built on an unsustainable illusion. Frank looked around at Robert's modest home with new appreciation. Your house is the only one in the community still with running water. Your well is still functioning. For now, Robert replied, I installed a deeper pump and reduced my usage to absolute minimum months ago. But even my well will fail eventually if the aquifer isn't recharged. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see a crowd gathering at the end of the driveway. Diane Winters stood at the center, her perfectly tailored suit replaced by designer jeans and a polo shirt, her hair disheveled. We should talk to them, Elena suggested. Outside, the mood was tense. At least 30 residents had assembled, many holding empty water containers. Diane stepped forward as Robert approached. Mr. Caston, she said, her voice strained but still commanding. The community requires access to your well. As an HOA member, you have an obligation to share resources during an emergency. The same HOA that cut my water line and ignored my warnings. Robert asked calmly. That's in the past, Diane insisted. We're facing a crisis now. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement with Diane, while others looked embarrassed by her demands. I've been sharing my water, Robert pointed out, gesturing to the spigot where several residents were filling containers. But my well isn't inexhaustible. If everyone in Whispering Pines tries to draw from it, it will fail within days. Then what do you suggest? Frank asked, joining them. Robert surveyed the crowd, seeing the fear and uncertainty in his neighbors' faces. Many he recognized from HOA meetings where they'd voted to fine him for his native plant landscaping or supported restrictions that primarily affected smaller properties like his. First, all landscape irrigation stops immediately. Not just a reduction, a complete stop, Robert said firmly. The artificial lake should be allowed to drain naturally to help recharge the aquifer. That lake is a signature feature of our community, Diane protested. Property values are worthless without water, several voices in the crowd finished in unison. Second, Robert continued, the golf courses need to be shut down completely. No watering whatsoever, not even for the tournament. This prompted stronger objections from several residents wearing Whispering Pines Golf Club polos. The tournament brings in crucial revenue, one argued. You can't host a tournament without bathrooms or drinking water, Alina pointed out. It's already been canceled. The county health department wouldn't permit it. Third, Robert said, we need every household to reduce water usage to absolute minimum. No pools, no car washing, limited shower time, catching gray water for toilet flushing. Like camping, an older woman said with distaste. Like survival, Robert corrected. The aquifer can recover, but only if we give it a chance. Every drop we conserve now helps. And fourth, Alina added, Westland Development Group needs to fund the emergency water connection to the county system. They created this disaster. They should pay to fix it. Diane's phone rang. She stepped away to answer it, her expression growing increasingly distressed. When she returned, her composure had completely dissolved. The tanker trucks are leaving, she announced, her voice shaking. Westland says they can't commit additional resources to a temporary situation. They're suggesting residents relocate until the drought breaks. A stunned silence fell over the group. Relocate, Maria echoed in disbelief. Where are we supposed to go? Most of us have our life savings tied up in homes that now have no water. And will have no value if this continues, Frank added grimly. As the implications sank in, the mood of the crowd shifted. Anger previously directed at Robert now focused on Diane and the absent Westland executives. You knew, a resident accused Diane. You had to know this was coming when you authorized cutting his water line. He was using creek water, not well water. I was following the rules, Diane defended weakly. The bylaws clearly state. The bylaws were written by Westland, another voice shouted. The same people who built this house of cards. Robert raised his hands for quiet. Blame won't solve our immediate problem. We need to work together now. As if to emphasize his point, the spigot at the side of his house sputtered and ran dry. A woman filling her jug looked up in alarm. Robert checked the monitoring system on his phone and sighed heavily. My well just failed. In the silence that followed, they all heard it. The distant rumble of the last Westland Development trucks leaving Whispering Pines, abandoning the community to its fate. Winter had finally brought rain. Not the torrential downpours they had prayed for, but steady, gentle precipitation that soaked into the parched earth rather than running off in destructive floods. The aquifer slowly began to recharge, and the county's emergency water line now connected Whispering Pines to the municipal system. Robert stood at the edge of his property, watching the modest stream of water making its way along the creek bed. The flow was nothing like its former strength, but it was a start. Nature was resilient when given a chance to heal. Admiring your handiwork? Elena asked, joining him at the creek's edge. Robert smiled. Nature did the hard part. We just stopped making it worse. Don't underestimate what you accomplished, Elena insisted. The county water management plan is being rewritten with your data as the foundation. 3 other communities have abandoned their artificial lakes. The State Environmental Commission has new regulations on development in drought-sensitive areas. And Westland Development Group is facing class action lawsuits from 6 communities, Robert added with satisfaction. Though I doubt the executives will miss any meals. They walked back toward Robert's house, passing the transformed landscape of Whispering Pines. The golf courses had been partially converted to drought-resistant public parks, with only one 9-hole course remaining. The artificial lake had been drained completely, its basin replanted with native species that would help restore the natural watershed. Lawns had been replaced with xeriscaping and native plants, much like Robert's yard that had once earned him so many HOA violations. The community center, once the bastion of HOA authority, now housed the Whispering Pines Water Conservation District, a new entity created by county ordinance and led by a board of elected residents. Their first action had been to dissolve the former HOA and rewrite the community bylaws to prioritize sustainability over aesthetics. Frank Chen waved from across the street where he was installing a rain barrel collection system. Meeting at 5, he called out. Don't be late. We're voting on the community garden proposal. Wouldn't miss it, Robert replied. As they approached his house, a small group of volunteers worked in what had once been his private vegetable garden, now expanded into a community growing space that supplied fresh produce to residents still recovering financially from the crisis. Many had been forced to sell their homes at devastating losses when the water failed, but those who remained had formed a different kind of community, one bound by shared hardship and determination rather than property values and status symbols. Ms. Diaz, Mr. Caston. A group of elementary school students gathered around a monitoring station called out excitedly, "Come see what we found." Robert and Elena joined the children who were participating in the new Waters education program. A young girl proudly displayed a collection jar with small aquatic insects swimming inside. "Water striders," she announced. "Mr. Caston said they would come back when the creek was healthy again." And he was right, their teacher added, just like he was right about the creek. Robert knelt to examine their find. "Good work, scientists. Keep detailed records. These little creatures tell us more about water quality than any machine." As the children continued their citizen science project, Elena nudged Robert and nodded toward a car parking across the street. Speaking of things returning, Diane Winters stepped out looking dramatically different from the polished HOA president of 6 months earlier. Her designer clothes have been replaced by practical jeans and a simple blouse, her carefully maintained hair now showing strands of natural gray. She hesitated before approaching, clearly uncomfortable. "Didn't expect to see her back," Robert murmured. "Be nice," Elena warned. "Everyone deserves a second chance." Diane walked up slowly, her eyes taking in the transformed neighborhood. "It's different," she managed. "Sustainable," Robert corrected. "Yes," Diane nodded. "That's why I'm here, actually. After everything that happened, I've been consulting with communities in Arizona about water conservation. Your model here at Whispering Pines is being studied as a case example." Robert raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Don't look so shocked," Diane said with a hint of her old sharpness. "I can learn from my mistakes. That's why I was hoping. Would you be willing to share your original water management proposal? The one the HOA rejected 3 years ago?" Robert and Elena exchanged glances. "I think we can do better than that," Elena offered. "We're presenting the comprehensive water management plan to the state next month. You're welcome to attend." "As a consultant?" Diane asked hopefully. "As a student," Robert replied, but without malice. "We all have more to learn." Diane accepted this with a nod, her gaze moving to the creek. "Is it true the water came back faster than you predicted?" "Nature can surprise us," Robert acknowledged. "Heal faster than expected if we get out of its way." "Like communities," Diane said quietly. The sound of children laughing drew their attention back to the creek, where the young scientists had discovered a small frog, another returning species, life finding a way back, adapting to the new reality. Later that evening, as the community meeting concluded and residents lingered to chat, Robert stood at the window watching Cottonwood Creek in the fading light. The water caught the sunset's glow, flowing steadily over rocks that had been dry for months. Frank joined him, following his gaze. "Hard to believe how close we came to losing it all." "We did lose a lot," Robert reminded him. "Homes, investments, the illusion of unlimited resources. And gain something better," Frank suggested. "A sustainable future, a real community." Outside, the first automatic sprinklers of the evening activated, not for lawns, but for the community garden and newly planted native trees that would eventually shade the creek and reduce evaporation, each drop carefully monitored and mindfully used. "You know," Frank said thoughtfully, "when they cut your water line, they thought they were enforcing rules. They had no idea they were setting off a chain of events that would transform everything." Robert smiled. "Sometimes you have to break something to fix it properly." As darkness fell, the creek continued its patient work, flowing, nourishing, healing, carrying the promise of renewal to a community that had finally learned to listen to what had been trying to tell them all along.